first, it's our own national treasure, the wonderful Jane Farley. Can I ask you, very cheekily, how old you would have been back in 1953?
23.
What are your memories of that time?
Well, it's interesting because we lived in Rochdale. My late husband's first church was a church called Spotland in Rochdale. Quite a happening town, Rochdale. It had Gracie Fields, of course, and that we all never forgot that, you know. But it was quite a lively town, very strong political views. The Liberals were very strong in Rochdale. And I was a very new minister's wife. And as my father said, when I got married to John, who was a bit older than me, he didn't think a church realised they were going to have a very young minister's wife who wouldn't have a clue. But I was made very welcome. I couldn't always understand them because although I come from Birmingham, I don't have a particular Birmingham accent. And the accents in Rochdale were fairly strong, as you can imagine. But it was a very friendly place, very friendly. And of course the coronation was coming up. Very few people in Rochdale, certainly the area where we lived, would have televisions. I mean, there just weren't that many people who did have them. They were fairly new, weren't they? The odd people who did have televisions would invite some of their friends in. I mean, it wasn't like now when a building would have a big television and people could go. So some senior members of John's church invited John and myself to go and watch the coronation at their house, which was lovely, very comfortable. And really, I don't think I'd seen much television. You didn't?
No, my own personal memories of televisions is the smell of one warming up. Do you remember the valves?
Yes.
We had a little 9-inch screen on ours, and it took forever to warm up.
Yes, it did.
And then somebody had to hold the aerial and get the picture.
And then things would happen, sort of flashes and little bits happen, wouldn't
absolutely right. So how many people went to this church?
There was Fred Ogden and his wife and their daughter Marjorie. Their other daughter I don't think was there. Funny enough, she lived in Birmingham. I didn't know her so well, but Fred and his wife, they were lovely, they were very kind. Fred was quite a character in the church. He was sort of the one who said how it was. And if you didn't agree with him, you either had to agree to disagree or you had to put up with it. But they were very kind and very friendly. I'm not sure whether he was involved in the cotton trade, as the most of the people in the church we had in Spotland, in Rochdale, were people who worked in mills, the cotton mills. I mean, that was the industry. Beginning probably to decline a little bit, but not vastly, really.
I presume most people knew of the coronation.
Oh, yes. I mean, radio meant a lot to a lot of people, and particularly to kids. Yeah. I mean, I grew up with Children's Hour and Uncle Mac on Children's Hour. It was great, and you learnt a lot too. He was very good on nature talks, was Uncle Mac. He talked to you quite a lot about that. Yes, he was sort of nice grandfather-ish sort of voice. Yes, we liked him.
So people relied quite heavily on radio.
Yes.
The lucky ones had television.
Yes, but
were there any community events organised to coincide with it?
I can't remember that, except I think the schools probably did something. I was doing a little bit of part-time teaching in various schools to sort of help out. And I wasn't really aware of a big amount but they must have done. Well, I know children had, I don't know whether they had mugs there or spoons. They tended to be coronation mugs. I don't know what's happened to mine. It was a spoon with a teaspoon with a sort of handle and the date on or something like that. I think the education committees probably, because it was a big event, wasn't it? It's so long since the last coronation for George VI, and that would be coloured a bit by the war then, of course, because, And a rather interesting thing about this particular church in this part of Rochdale because when Jersey and Guernsey were invaded, quite a lot of school kids were evacuated literally 2 or 3 days. I mean, they knew the Germans were coming by then. And a school load from Guernsey actually came and lived in this part of Rochdale, and quite a few families had children from Guernsey staying with them, so there was quite a strong link between this particular church and the Channel Islands.
How did that come about then?
Well, I think there must have been at least 1 or 2 personal things. I mean, it happened very quickly. So people who remembered the occupation, they didn't have long. They probably had 2 or 3 days. And it would be secondary school children. It wouldn't be the sort of reception classes. And it would be some mothers with young children. Quite a big load of school kids came. And when we were there, 1953, there were still quite close links.
So from your memories, and you've done incredibly well to recall what you have, what would you say the reaction was by the people who lived in Rochdale? Were they hugely supportive of the coronation?
Yes, I think they were.
They wanted to celebrate it, especially
definitely.
after
and I mean, it wasn't the first time there was going to be a big countrywide celebration. And I mean, some people managed to go down to London and saw it, how all happened. And I think schools were quite keen on talking about it to kids, because this was something once in a lifetime. And look where we are, 70 years later.
Absolutely.
Wait, not having another one yet?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you ever so much for your time.
It's a pleasure, any time.
Absolutely fabulous. Well, I'll come back to you for the next two.
I'm Mary Birkinshaw, who was Mary Olorenshaw. We came up to Derwent in 1943 in a pony and trap from North Lees, and then we settled in Derwent, but Derwent was a different place because all the people that were under the waterline had moved away or been relocated, and there were only the gamekeepers and the people who lived in the Duke of Norfolk's properties. He was still alive and they were still above the waterline. Life was quite nice actually in Derwent. Because the others are all moved away, everybody joined in with everybody else, and Dad always cut everybody's hair, all the same style of course. If we killed an animal, we would take to the cottagers, take them a few chops or lamb or pork or something, and they in extra, we supplied the milk because Dad milked 2 cows. And the cottagers were all very good gardeners at Jubilee Cottages, and you only needed a few tomatoes and or a lettuce, and we used to be sent on there to ask Mr. Wilson if he'd got a lettuce that we could have for tea or something in that. So really life was quite easy until 1947 came along and we had that bad snow, and then things got very hard. But we had the cows, and Dad did the milking so Mum could make butter. She was very good at bread. Her mother had made bread for the village in Hathersage before the war. So she made the butter, and when we came home from school, when we were not snowed in, we would have a bowl of whipped cream in the middle of the table and a pot of homemade jam and homemade bread and homemade butter. So we didn't need anybody else. And when the snow came, she had to teach 1 or 2 people how to make bread, because all they sent was a bag of flour and some yeast, and that had to last for 6 weeks, so they were really a bit hard pushed. Then came the coronation, and with no electric, but Dad decided that we should have a generator and have a television. So he found out that Edward Marsden, that's John's brother, lived at Abney, and he was getting rid of a large generator. It had been used on the farm, and so really it was far too big for what he wanted, but it was a generator and that would be all right. So we got wired up, and about 6 weeks before the coronation he got it installed, and then we asked for a television. Well, there weren't any televisions around, And so we finally ended up with two. And one had got the picture and one had got the sound. So it was a toss-up as to which one we kept, and we decided on the picture one, I think, and that was to put that one on. Anyway, a proper television did arrive by Coronation Day, and the Coronation Day was, we'd put all chairs out in the sitting room and got the telly on, but the telly, because it was so big, the generator, you couldn't see the picture, it was shaking that much, unless you switched every light on. Every appliance had to be switched on to calm the generator down and make the picture watchable, as you might say. And but that was, anybody who wanted could come along and come and watch the television. So the celebration on the telly. But in the village, we had sort of quite a good community, and when I look at the photograph, there were a lot, practically everybody turned out. My dad had managed to form a parish council, so we could do a meal in the community centre, which had been the Catholic school. And with all these people that came, we've got a very big parish now. It had previously been just Derwent, Ashipton, Ladybower, but now we included, it was Derwent and Woodlands. We went right up to the Snake Inn, and we went round, up past the Ladybower, up to Shrines Lane End, and people came. Actually, we had people from Abney, I can see on the photograph, and people from Thornhill, Bamford. It must have been a good meal we were having, because they seemed to all turn up and they're on this here photograph. There were no other people about in those days, so we had sports under the down wall on that flat piece, under Derwent down wall, and it was everybody competed in that. And then they moved down to St Henry's, which was where the slap-up meal was put on, and each person brought something for the meal. I think food was still in short supply, so some would have killed an animal or something and bring a joint. And my mother had plenty of cream, so she always made the trifles. And I was 12 at the time. But we wouldn't be able to be open too late because we didn't have electricity down in the rooms, so it'd only be paraffin lamps or tilly lamp. And we didn't have the kitchen at that time because the gamekeeper had still got that as a bedroom for his mother-in-law. So through the door into what is now the kitchen was a bedroom for Mrs. Dearden, I think she was called. The memorabilia which I've lent to Hathersage for their celebration this time belonged to Mrs. Law. Now Mrs. Law, Percy Law was the butcher in Hathersage, and he lived where the bakery is now, on the end of Brentwood there. And I think she must have had all these photographs, and she was so royal. But she was there for the first celebration, and at the shop must have looked fantastic, I assume, in Bamford, because we had our own decorations up there, and I don't know where they went.
Now, Mary's very kindly brought us into a room at her home. It's absolutely full of coronation memorabilia. What can you tell us about it, Mary? What are these photographs?
Well, Mrs. Law was the butcher's wife, Percy Law at Bamford, and she died in 1976, I think, but she was very, very royal. And anything to do with the royal family, she would buy it or go and see it or do something. And this we found amongst the contents of what she left were just all in a box. I assume that she put them up in the butcher's shop in Bamford for the coronation, and it would have been a wonderful display she'd got there. I can't imagine anyone else buying 2 photographs of the Queen and Prince Philip for the coronation, and then she's got another photograph there which is of them side by side, and that's in black and white. The others are in colour. Then in the picture frame here we've got Charles and Anne, and that is in black and white. The shield will be 18 inches by a foot, and then the big crown on the top of it, I don't know where she would put that. Then we've got 2 sort of lengths with "Long Live the Queen." They're bright red with blue, royal blue, and then written in white. And they are made of paper, but they would have been just stuck on, I don't want to say what they were only a light paper, but they're substantial paper. Then we've got a Union Jack, which is there, which is in material, which is a big one, which might put up somewhere. Then we've got the Charles and Anne, a proper book there, which she would have bought. I think she had more, but I don't know what happened to them. Then further on, we've got you would say is an oversized tea towel sort of shape, but it's got the Queen and it's got the Union Jack on it, and it looks about 3 foot long by about 2.5 foot deep. She must have kept them somewhere under the bed or something. And then we've got another sort of paper, what would you call it, that would fit on the window or something, and that's the Queen again, really bright colours, the Queen in. And then we've got what you would say is wallpaper. It's a long strip which would have hung down the side of the butcher's shop window, I think. The blue and the red are absolutely fantastic. The colour hasn't disappeared. And apart from it being folded up, I'll have to see if I can iron that out a bit. That would hang straight, quite long down the wall, I would say, length of a window.
Yeah, we've got a photograph here.
That's the Lady Bower Inn in about 1900. Just found it in a drawer, that's why that is there.
Absolute gold dust.
With the horse and carriage outside. Yeah. And then we've got a box with what we would say are a few flags. I don't know what they were fixed on. They seem to have fittings. They could have been for cars or I don't know what they are. And then there are a couple of postcards which have got the royal family on in the box there next to it. Shame to leave them stuck in the box. Might as well get them out.
Well, thank you so much for your time today, Mary. I can't tell you how grateful
I've really enjoyed showing you.
Oh,
if you want to know more about Derwent, there's plenty about that.
It's really brought the coronation celebrations to life.
Yes.
And it's a marvellous collection.
It shows that people thought a lot of it at the time.
Yes. You're a lovely lady, Mary, and thank you so much for giving us of your time.
Well, thank you for coming.
No, I've really enjoyed it. On the 9th of May, I was lucky enough to be invited to join the luncheon club at the Methodist Church Hall. After a delicious meal, Penny Jewett asked if anybody had met or been close to the Queen. First to respond was Angie Ward.
I went to a garden party at Buckingham Palace with a lovely hat and a special dress, and she did walk quite close by, but we didn't make eye contact and we didn't shake hands, but she was quite close. And as always, people remark she has a most wonderful complexion.
Up next, it was the turn of Jill Wright.
1952, I was 14 years old and I was at school in a place called Congo in Africa. Prince Philip and Princess Elizabeth had been visiting one of the places that you visit there to see wildlife and everything. And as they came out from looking at this, there came a message through from London to say that the king had died and that she was now queen and she would have to return to London straight away. So I feel as if I was one of the first people to look on the Queen when she became Queen.
Next to speak was Jill Betts, who told a wonderful tale about a real surprise she got when attending a horse race meeting.
And said to my friends, would you mind if I watched television this afternoon to watch the racing from Epsom? And our friends said, well, we've never been to the races, we'll go. So we all went to Epsom and we came to a particular area where there was a clown standing handing out Union Jacks. And he gave me a Union Jack and I said, what do I need this for? You don't wave flags at the races. She said, no, but you wave flags at the Queen and she's coming through that gate in 5 minutes' time. And we stood there and the gate opened and the procession came in with the Queen and Prince Philip and I don't know who everyone else was, but it was really exciting because she really did look beautiful.
I didn't catch our next contributor's surname, but her first name was Joan, who wanted to tell us about an unbelievable experience during the Silver Jubilee of 1977.
I'm Joan. And mine is when it was the Silver Jubilee. And I was teaching, and Mick was teaching in Liverpool. And the Queen and Prince Philip were coming to Liverpool to celebrate the Silver Jubilee with the people. So we were given the afternoon off, so we could go. I stood near the Anglican Cathedral because that was nearest to my school. So I saw them come out, get on the open top vehicle, and they went all along Hope Street to the Catholic Cathedral, or as the Liverpudlians called it, Paddy's Wigwam. And my husband Mick, he was outside the Catholic one, and the children from his school somehow had been asked to do a guard of honour. And the Queen arrived with John Butcherman and Prince Philip, and they were walking up. Unbeknown to Mick, one of his children, a little Chinese boy called Jimmy, decided it would be fun to have some fun with Prince Philip, and he pulled out a water pistol and he wanted to squirt Prince Philip. And Mick said he couldn't believe it. Within seconds, there were 4 men round this child with the water pistol. He said he had no idea they were in the crowd, but they were there. And they explained that he shouldn't really, not a good idea, and took the water pistol. And I thought, I think Prince Philip would have probably enjoyed that, and said he might have said a remark he shouldn't these days, but I think he might have seen the funny side.
And finally, Penny Jewett gives us a first-hand insight into the distribution of Maundy money at Sheffield Cathedral.
Which is fairly recently, in 2015, when I was invited to the Royal Maundy service at Sheffield Cathedral. Now, as you all know, this happens every year, and it's always held in a different cathedral around the country. And during her reign, the Queen, by 2015, had been to all, but I think it was 3 cathedrals in the country. And she came, and at the time she was 89, and she gives money to 89 men and 89 women in 2 purses, a white purse and a red purse. And I remember sitting in the cathedral, and I was probably about 2 yards away from her as she walked down the aisle just giving this money. And I will always remember the way she actually looked directly into the eyes of the recipient. Didn't take her eyes away from that recipient as she gave them these little pouches of money. And she did that 158 times, because that's how many little pouches she gave out on that occasion. And she was just so regal. It was lovely, and I will always remember seeing her and feeling how fortunate I was to be able to go to that service. So that was my little memory of her.
And so ended my visit to just one of our most loved village institutions. My sincerest thanks to the entire team who prepare the fabulous meals every single week, to the brilliant helpers for whom nothing seems to be too much trouble, and of course to the diners themselves for contributing to our Platinum Coronation celebrations. Thank you all.
I was Sheila Wilson, and I lived in Hathersage until I was married. I have very happy memories of Hathersage. I know people go all over today to Lanzarote or America, but when we used to go to Sunday school, we had to go 3 times a day, I can tell you, on a Sunday. We had a Sunday school trip, and that was up to Mary Oller Henshaw then, and Father Ray, at their farm. And they was in a big field, and the ladies at the Sunday school, Mrs. Midgley, she was a Sunday school teacher. Yeah. Vera Marsden, because we used to torment her, terrible. Joe Cripps, he was another. John Stafford, the Methodist minister for years. We had a paper bag, white paper bag, with a couple of sandwiches, a bun, and something else in it. And we just played in the field, and to us it was absolutely marvellous. I mean, today they'd just laugh at you if you thought that's all you were doing. But to us it was really lovely. We were the first family to move into number 6 Moreland Road when the new council houses were built. And there was Mrs. and Mrs. Brocklehurst next door at one side. There was Mr. and Mrs. John Dalton at the other side. There was Mr. and Mrs. Knowles next again. And then at the other side there was Mrs. Charlie and her husband. She was Gladys Wilson actually. But we always called her Mrs. Charlie because her husband was called Charlie. Happy memories on Moreland Road when we were growing up. And the Hibberts lived in Mrs. Langley, she married again. But there were Billy Hibbert and all them, they lived on Moreland Road. Jean and Joyce and Desmond Williams, they lived on the first one. Mr. and Mrs. Frost. Tom Greenwood, he used to cut men's hair in his house, 1937. I think that's when the pool opened, And George Lawrence gave it to and then of course he went into Sheffield during the bombing to see his workers were all right, and he was killed with them. I remember that, ever so plainly. We as children we knew it was the war, but we didn't realise really the awful significance of it and how terrible it was. When there was an air raid, they used to get us up and put us under the glory hole. That was under the stairs, and our barrel, of course we'd bare feet, and we'd a cat, Tibby, and it had kittens. And one night we went in, and then she started screaming her head off, and these kittens were clinging to her bare feet. And then one night there was thick snow on the ground just during the war, and my granny had set the chimney on fire. Well, of course it was blackout, and my granddad, he was a very impatient little man, and he was jumping up and down. Myra, Myra, the Germans are coming, I can hear them coming, the bombers we'll all be killed and then they'll blame us. I always remember that. There were ration books, sweet rationing, because we had sweet coupons. You used to have to save them up if you wanted them. But Mrs. Simmons was ever so good. She'd always put you an extra bit of something in, like you shouldn't have had really with your coupons. They never had any children, they couldn't have them. But she was lovely with children. Of course, you didn't see tin fruit or anything like that. We didn't see bananas or oranges. I remember Mr. Roach, he had a greengrocer's shop up Back Lane. And when first having bananas and oranges, well, I remember that's as plain as anything, that we had a banana. I mean, now, if they're a bit ripe, I don't eat them, but then they were absolute luxury. Billy Bockin's shop at the bottom, it was a very dark shop, because they never had any lighting on, and they never had a fire, ever. He was a very clever man, a lovely man. But none of them ever met. I think they did one. There was Delia, there was Bertha. She used to peer at you through sweet bottles. You didn't know she was even there, And all of a sudden she'd say, "Can I help you?" Frighten you to death. And if you went in and Billy was serving you, he always had a great big overcoat thing on. And because they were so cold, and fingerless gloves. And his fingers were always blue, numb. And if you asked for something that he hadn't got, he'd say, "Just a minute." And he'd nip out the back door, run up to Bannerman's and get whatever he wanted and come back and sell it you. I know there was old-fashioned jars of sweets. They'd all those lined up, sort of like a wall, really. But he'd sell anything, really. It was always so dark in there, But he was a lovely man. Yeah. Lovely man. Very well educated. Maid Owens. Hers was a clothes shop, and the corner cupboard was next door, which is where the bottom bank was. I don't know what they are now. There was 2 Hancocks, bottom Hancocks and top Hancocks. There was Eric Barksby's hardware shop at the bottom. There was my Uncle Albert and Auntie Edith's hardware shop at the top, opposite near the chemist. There was Mr. Rastall's fruit shop. Mr. Littlewood, Asa Littlewood. My mother would never let us call us Asa. He used to say, "Call me Asa. You don't call him, he's Mr. to you." So we never did call him Asa Littlewood. And he made the best potted meat we ever had in his lives. And even now, nobody can make potted meat like Mr. Littlewood can. Kennings had a showroom and everything there. Got flooded out. And it smashed the window and the cars were floated. Yeah. And there were Hemmings butcher shop at the bottom. Mr. and Mrs. Hemmings and Joy Hemmings, she was their daughter. That's now still a butcher shop. There was Bannerman's at the top. They sold lovely little bread buns with sugar on top. We always call them Bannerman's Bouncers. And they were a penny. There was Jack Pierce opposite. He was a clothes shop. There was Prince's at the top of Crossland Road. I think that was some sort of clothes shop, if I remember rightly. Mrs. Simmons, where our Simon lives now, Simon Wilson, at bottom of Fernroyd, that was a grocer's shop. Ibbottson's in the corner farm. We used to fetch milk from there in a can. One night, me and our Beryl were going, it was dark. We had like a billy can thing. And when we were coming on, this man was coming out, you know, sort of, what was we thought, only being kids, thought he was following us. He wasn't. And of course we ran up Jennell to where Mr. and Mrs. Billy Simmons lived. And he followed us, and of course he lived up there. And we swung this milk, and all milk shot out. My mother went mad when we got home. I was at New Mills Grammar School and we were in French lesson. Somebody came in and said something to her, and Miss Hughes started crying, and they took us all into assembly and said the king had died. And I remember that as plain as anything. He had the king's funeral, obviously. It seemed a long time to me till she was actually crowned. There's so much to put into place. He was a very popular king. Apparently he had a very bad temper, very volatile, but he was a good king. When it was the coronation day, they had a television in the Methodist schoolroom because very few people had televisions then in the houses, and I sat all day. And I sat all day and watched it. And I remember thinking when Philip knelt to her, I thought, how romantic. I thought that was the loveliest bit in it, really. And I remember the golden coat, you know, seeing that, and it was so marvellous to see it all. You really felt part of it. I worked at Gardeners up Sheffield Road. They were a lovely family. And John, when it was the coronation, he built a lovely scale model of the golden coach. I remember that. He used to stand in his bedroom. Yeah, I know. I sat all day and watched it. And I loved all the music, all the pageantry of it, really. There were a lot of people there, and it was a lovely atmosphere. The chairs got very hard after sitting on them a bit. But I remember just sitting fascinated by it. Thought the whole thing was wonderful. Some had a tear in their eye when she was actually crowned, you know, and yeah, it was a lovely experience and something that's always stayed with me. I remember thinking when they put the crown on her head, she'll be wondering if he's going to stay on, because apparently it was very heavy and it must have been a real burden to her actually, because she had it on a long time and it seemed so colourful.
Thank you ever so much.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah, it's been a pleasure to reminisce. Happy days.
Well, my name is Mary Bailey and I've lived in Hathersage all my life. I remember the night that the King died and we had to listen to the radio.
This is London. It is with the greatest sorrow that we make the following announcement. It was announced from Sandringham at 10:45 today, February the 6th, 1952, that the King, who retired to rest last night in his usual health, passed peacefully away in his sleep early this morning.
It was very, very sad. I remember being told, do be quiet, sit still, be quiet, don't say anything, listen to this. And even when the national anthem came up in our house, we had to stand up. Then later on at school, it was very reverent and it was very sombre. And if we had daily papers in those days, we had to take them to school and make a scrapbook. And then we saw the pictures in the paper of the poor Queen coming back from this tour she'd been on. And it was very, very sad. And as a country, I think, well, just as a village, we felt incredibly sad. And then, of course, all this talk of this coronation. We children at school, we had no idea what a coronation was because we'd never known one before. And nearer the time, we were all getting very excited because we knew we were going to have a tea party or picnic or something. We were all mostly still on ration, I think, then. And so to have jelly and blancmange and delicious things like that cooked by the ladies of the village. I particularly want to mention Mrs. Rudkin because she was a lady, she was widowed, but she had a passion for looking after the children and the old age pensioners. And the old age pensioners in those days had a very special party organised by Mrs. Rudkin. Where she got the funds from to put on all this, I don't know, but I think she had a good team. And I believe that all the old age pensioners had something like an afternoon tea in the memorial hall with, well, it would have been delicious sandwiches in those days because everything was plain and very simple. But I remember we did have a party somewhere. Where we had it, I think it might have been in the Methodist Hall. The kids were in the Methodist Hall and the elderly statespeople of this village were in the memorial hall. People talk about bunting. I don't remember bunting, but I do remember that we girls were asked to wear either red, white and blue, or we had pretty dresses. I just had a very simple blue and white dress. And at Brownies, Winnie Rodenhout, our brown owl, persuaded us all that we had to learn the words. We all knew the first verse to God Save the King, but now it was going to be God Save the Queen, and so she was teaching us the second verse, and we had to say it, not sing it to begin with. Each of us had to remember a line, and so it went on and on and on until we'd got these words. Now, where we sang the national anthem that day, again, I can't remember. During the day, we children were given a coronation spoon. I wish I could remember who had given it to us and whether all the school children in Derbyshire got one or whether it was just some very benevolent person in the village that had them made for us. And it's just a simple little spoon, but I've kept it to this day in the box, and there it is in all its glory, and it's a little treasure. It may not be worth a lot of money, but it is a very wonderful memory.
Lots of people have referred to the spoons,
yeah,
but I've never seen one.
Right.
So that's the first time I've seen one.
It's so easy to go and, all these treasures that we had years ago.
Yes.
You think, oh, well, that's not worth anything, throw it away. But, I've always been you can see, I've always been a collector. Yes, I've held that very dear. Particularly when you think 70 years. As a child, I had that, and I've still got it. I was going to find you the picture of me sitting there in my blue and white dress, but I will find it. Another treasure I kept is the coronation approved souvenir programme, 2 shillings and 6pence, and this was King George's Jubilees Trust.
Fabulous. What pictures are in there?
Well, the procession, for we people that haven't got television things, and it was all laid out in this little booklet. 2 shillings and 6pence was quite a lot of money in those days. It's published by the gracious permission of Her Majesty the Queen. Here I've got, interesting, Hathersage Summer Celebrations, the 19th to 25th of July 1953. And it was, this is a souvenir programme, yeah, obviously. All the things going on and the programme of events in the Seal Field. Most people in the village won't know what the Seal Field is. And so by whom it was organised, the Reverend Fairclough. Yes, he was the vicar at the time. Mrs. Fairclough, his wife, when we became girl guides, she used to teach us French. But we only went to these classes because also on a Friday night, the Boy Scouts were gathering at the Scout Hut. And so we thought, well, we'd say we're going to French lessons and we go down and see the Boy Scouts. And there's the Silver Band. Most people never knew we had a silver band in this village, which was a wonderful silver band that used to perform at all these occasions and at the Hathersage Horticultural Society annual show in the school. Before it went into the Memorial Hall, it was in the school. We had a very special horticultural show also that year. And the Good Old Women's Institute, the Cricket Club, the Old Age Pensioners, Mrs. Rudkin. There you go. She was an absolute... She should have been honoured, for all she did.
And Margaret, her daughter-in-law, lives in the village now. Yes, yeah. Hathersage District Swimming Club, affiliated to Hathersage Hockey Club, John Strafford. The staff of the school, we were doing a procession, we were doing dancing, various points in the village, finally in the Seal Field. And there's a second performance of the pageant in the Seal Field later, and the Hathersage Young Conservatives and the Victory Social Club. We're doing a modern dance in the Memorial Hall and a whist drive in the Lawrence Hall. I wonder if that's when AD4 were playing. And that was a band we used to have in the village in those days. And then we had children's sports in the Seal Field and a fell race and a carnival procession which all assembled at the station, and an old-time dance in the Memorial Hall organised by the folk dancing group. And advertising this beautiful little celebration is all the shops and businesses in the village. That was snow on the cricket field that year. Cliff House coaches, oh my goodness. That summer celebration that year, it really was a summer celebration. It really was all the stops. It was all red, white and blue, and we got the Windhill Girls. Does it mention the Windhill?
I think it does, yeah.
The Windhill Girls. But no, it was a real summer of celebration. What we were learning at school at the time was that Sir Edmund Hillary was going up Everest. And we were all interested in such an adventure. And we got the charts on the wall, the geography. We were doing geography of it and all the rest of it. Anything that was in the paper, we kept all these things. And then it was announced on the morning of the Queen's coronation, or was it the day before, it was announced that Edmund Hillary and Sherpa Tenzing had conquered Everest. And we kids at school, we thought that we were part of it. It was such an occasion. Yeah. So when later on Edmund Hillary was doing a tour, our school got offered so many tickets to go to Buxton to meet him, to listen to him. And so it was like first come, first serve. So I immediately put my hand up and said I wanted to go. And my friend Cherry Powell, Cherry Wilson, that was, she wanted to go. And I said, we'll have 2 tickets. Please can we have 2 tickets? And Cherry and I and another 2, we went to see him in Buxton. Oh,
what can you remember from the school of those
everybody.
days?
Everybody.
Who's the headmaster?
Oh, Harry Schofield. No, he was a military man, an army man through and through, and yes, ruled us. In the morning we had to arrive and we had to be on time. It didn't matter how far you lived away from school. You had to be there on the bell, and I sometimes rang the bell. Brian sometimes rang the bell. And you had lines like the army outside, regimental lines, and the girls would go in first, in age and everything through. And then the boys. And then I remember all the teachers, right from the infants. We had lovely Miss Adlington. Then, of course, we had my beloved Miss Darnley, who was a lifelong friend of mine. She was very special to me. And Miss Beryl Lewis, who was very sporty. Her father was Councillor Lewis, Derbyshire Dales councillor, I believe. And then we had Jeff Darwin, who was everybody's favourite. He also served the Queen, but he was gentle and lovely. And then we had Colin West, and then we had Harry Schofield. The centre was built in the 1950s, so the boys had half of the centre for woodworking and design and things like that. And we girls had domestic science, which was my favourite thing, of course. My teacher was, early days, Mrs. Jepson, and then Mrs. Singleton came. And on the boys' side, it was Mr. Ashworth, who was a very gentle person, but the boys all got on with him. And then, of course, we had the school garden, ready for when the school governors came, because it had to look amazing. And years ago, before Smithy Meadows was built, there's a part of that there that was the school garden. But the boys in the 50s propagated a dahlia which became known as a Hathersage dahlia, and the variety was called Hathersage, and it became a classed. We had lunch in the Lawrence Hall. That's the first place I remember having lunch, in the Lawrence Hall. But also we had it in what is now the Swimming Pool Cafe. And a lovely team of ladies. Mrs. Young and her friends used to cook we children the best meals you could ever have. It was absolutely something we looked forward to. And of course we had the swimming pool, and the swimming pool went out of favour in the 1950s, which was very sad. I got banned from going. Not because I'd been naughty, which was very sad, because we had an outbreak of polio. So about 5 of my friends at school got polio, and it was thought at the time that it was from going to the swimming pool. So we were not allowed to go to the swimming pool, which was very sad because this is something that we absolutely loved to do. At school, we had our own printing press. We had a very big printing machine. We had all the letters, the capitals and the small letters. And of course you had to set up the type wrong way round, back to front. And Colin West was in charge of a team of about 6 of us who would put the print together. But we printed so many things at school. It was always printed and published by the school. In the 50s, Mr. and Mrs. Tomlinson came to the village, and Mrs. Tomlinson was a very clever artist. And she did lino cuts, and so she would go to many places, like supposedly the halls of Hathersage, and do something and make a lino print so we can then copy it.
Now we're coming up for the platinum anniversary of Her Majesty.
Yeah.
Have you already special plans for that?
I've got nothing specially planned for the days because graciously given quite a long weekend for everybody, which is rather nice. We've got a wedding on one of the days, which I didn't think it was very sensible of my granddaughter to choose that day, but never mind. It's a very good day. But no, we will have a family get-together, as we often do, and our neighbours will have a bit of fun with them. But we've been planning in our own way to celebrate the Queen's Platinum Jubilee by planting a woodland meadow in our back fields with the help of the Peak Park, and we planted rather a lot of trees, lots of oak. We planted trees for all the family, and Michael's made some seats out of some trees that we told we had to cut down because they got a disease. So we got 2 lovely seats up there with little plaques on. It's just for people's pleasure, not for any other reason. But we are going to plant a special tree, a silver birch. We've managed to get one. It seems like this year that everybody's buying silver birch because it's the nearest they can get to a platinum. And so we'll put a little plaque up there very discreetly. But no, we are great royalists, and we shall celebrate. Yes, and I hope by a little bit later, probably in June, we shall have some of our special wine back. Oh, Wayne.
Hi folks, my name is Chris Cave. At the time of the coronation I was living in Hathersage on Roslin Crescent in a house backing onto the bowling green with my parents and 3 siblings. We were fortunate in that we did have a television. When it worked, I remember many times when it didn't work and the engineer would come and we had valves and pieces spread out all over the lounge floor while he found out what was wrong with it. Fortunately, there was a C.O. Birtles guy who was a friend of my parents who lived on Crossland Road, so he could always come and repair it. On Coronation Day, it was working perfectly. I've got a number of mementos from the coronation that I've dug out recently, including 2 that nobody else seems to have found. One is a coronation tie, a blue tie, with little stagecoaches or rather not stagecoaches but rail coaches and horses trotting across it, and the other a little hologram of the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh, and when you tip it you get Prince Charles and Princess Anne. These things have gone, I think, to the Hathersage exhibition now. I've got these things to remind me about the coronation, but my big memory of it is that I wanted to go out and play, and my mother said, "No, you don't. You've got to sit and watch it. You don't know when you'll get to see another coronation." And in that, I don't think she realised how right she would be. But anyway, I remember having to sit there in front of the television in the dark, as you did in those days, with a lot of other people who she'd invited in, and really, I didn't enjoy Coronation Day at all.
My name is Michael Rumsey. My mother was from Sheffield and she was 16 when she went into service in London. That's how she met my father. At the end of the war, he married my mother. And then from there they went into service in London, and then the Depression came in. My dad lost everything. My uncle Jack got him a job in the steelworks. 6 months later, the steelworks shut down. Earl's Cement Works was being built. My dad was one of 200 walked from Sheffield to the cement work to work. I was born in 1941 in the air raid shelter in Jessup, Sheffield, which at the time was getting bombed. My mother brought me to Hope and I lived in the marshes with my 3 brothers and my 4 sisters. Growing up in the marsh was brilliant because there was a lot of children who were all had 3s and 4s in the families, and it was lovely. After the war we moved further into Hope, where I went to school up Edale Road. I was 4 when my mother took me up there with my sisters, and I left at 15 on the Friday and I started work on the Monday, and I came to Hathersage to Schofield. I cycled 5 miles there and 5 miles back. Recalling about the coronation, I was 12. It rained. God, didn't it rain? Nobody virtually had any television, so the television was in the Hope School. But when I got there, we were right at the back of school, so we couldn't see a damn thing. Arthur Chadman got these deer for the coronation. I don't know where they got them from, I presume it was from Chatsworth. He got quite a lot of us lads to carry them. I was one of them, my younger brother Pip, he was one. There was the Watsons boys, 2 boys, and Smiths, Trevor Vernon. My father was at the back, he was going to be the cook. The old man Watson and Mr. Watson himself. Where we stood is where now is the Watson's butcher's shop. So we carried it down there and we were all dressed up in white aprons and white hats, like chef's hats. And then we went across to Loxley Hall. Well, the biggest shock of my life when I walked into Loxley Hall, because remember it was rationing, and I was brought up on rationing right up to 1957. Some people say it finished at Coronation Day, but it wasn't. They had swinging doors and they opened these doors. And I can see now 2 lots of tables, and it was full of food. Food I've never seen before, cakes. I was like one of 8 and my mother took all my rationing cards for sugar. We were brought up on basic food, but we didn't go hungry. It was the first time I ever had a jelly. We had hens at the bottom of the garden, and my dad had an allotment, so we just brought up on basic food. I was 9 when I had my first banana, and my mother used to say, go down and queue up and we'll get your banana. And when I did get it, after about the 4th or 5th attempt, I bit into it like an apple. I mean, Nora laughed her head off, because the only time I ever saw a banana was a picture, because I didn't realise you had to blooming peel it. And it was one of the biggest disappointments of my life when I had to peel this blooming banana. When we walked in to get our food, we were all presented with a cup, coronation spoon, and an anointing spoon. And the anointing spoon is one what the Queen gets anointed with, and it's a miniature one representing it. Some other villages got different, but that's what we got. My father got presented with a paper knife from one of the stag's anklers, and I've still got that, you know, to remember my dad more than anything else. I haven't got the cup because, like everything else, they get broken. But I've still got the spoons. So yeah, we had a good time. I'm a royalist and I'm proud to be it. I'm a royalist because the Crown keeps this country stable. Every family has trouble. Most people can't say they haven't had any trouble in the family. But it's a royal family. The Queen's the stable part. She's just got some children what? Well, like all children, they can't do everything right. Yeah, I'm a royalist and I'm proud to be.
Up next, it's Eileen Wostenholme, who was actually present on the Mall in London in June 1953 and personally witnessed the coronation procession firsthand. I asked her how she came to be in London on that amazing day.
I was a Yorkshire girl. I moved to Plumstead in the middle of the war. The house opposite was totally annihilated. All our windows went.
Obviously got vivid memories of that.
I have, because we were frightened, you see. And when my grandfather, because I was with my grandmother and grandfather at the time, used to stand at the air raid shelter door and listen for the doodlebugs. I was very, very young, but I felt the fear. I would be about 4, I suppose, 4 or 5. I was put on the train with my identity disc. My mother couldn't travel with me. My grandmother met me at the other end. It would have been 44.
So this is in the middle of the war?
Yeah.
When most people had been evacuated?
Yeah. It was a fairly rough area. The neighbours were fantastic. You know, it was good wartime camaraderie. I can remember we were walking along the street and the air raid siren suddenly started. We had to lie down on the pavement because there was no shelter nearby. I remember that. But it was the fear of the adults I remember more than anything. And we used to sometimes, in the middle of winter, just shelter under the table.
Now, what can you actually remember about Coronation Day?
I was nearly 13 years old and had been called to the headmistress's office. I nervously tapped on her door, wondering what I'd done wrong. To my delight, however, she said I'd been selected to represent the school to stand on the Mall and watch the coronation. I was very privileged. Only one child had been chosen from each secondary school in the area, and there were many schools. My memories of that wonderful day are somewhat hazy, but here's what stands out in my mind. It was 5 a.m. and a misty, damp morning. I set off to join other children for the train from Plumstead to central London. We were given Union Jacks and a bag full of snacks. We had to be in situ very early, and it was a long, long wait, but there was great excitement in the air, and we practised cheering everyone who went down the Mall. Various military dignitaries, police, and even the road sweepers. The weather didn't improve. Although it wasn't cold, a steady fine drizzle had set in. When at last the procession started, a great wave of cheering began. It seemed to go on for hours. One person who still stands out in my mind is the Queen of Tonga. In spite of the rain, she rode with her carriage hood down and had the broadest smile, acknowledging our cheers and clearly enjoying herself. Of course, the crescendo of cheering heralded the arrival of Queen Elizabeth herself. In the eyes of a young girl, she was a fairy tale figure. The excitement was palpable. From our viewpoint, it was over far too quickly. People sitting at home watching on their newly acquired televisions would have seen much more, but nothing could replace the feeling of anticipation and excitement that we all felt. We were actually there at the time. We all had to write an account of what we'd seen. I can't remember what I wrote, but it won first prize and I got free tickets to a pantomime.
And was it the full extent of the Mall? And
Yeah.
more?
Well, I mean, I was stuck on the Mall. Say that the road sweepers used to come along and sweep up the horses' mess before the Queen came. I remember that.
I'm Michael Shuttleworth and I live in Hathersage. 70 years ago, I was at school when we heard of the death of King George VI. And I remember exactly where I was, standing in the boot room at my little school in Surrey, and we were all absolutely knocked out by the news. We knew the king was ill, but when the death actually occurred and suddenly we realized that an institution which we'd grown to be completely used to was in change and we were going to get a new king or queen, we were quite shocked. As time went on, and of course there was over a year between the death of the king and the coronation of the new queen, we began to anticipate and look forward to this amazing parade and celebration which surrounded our new and beautiful young queen. In June 1953, having anticipated this extraordinary event, I persuaded my parents to let me have the day off from school. After much persuasion, I was taken out and we caught the train up to London, which was in a turmoil of preparation for the coronation. We found our way to Piccadilly, having walked across Green Park, and I think having walked most of the way from Waterloo. And we took up our positions. We were standing opposite the In and Out on Piccadilly. I was quite small, being 11 years old, and I managed to push myself to the front of the queue. When the parade started, and this was after the coronation itself, it left Westminster Abbey, and we got an absolute ringside view of our new queen and her consort in the state coach. I think the second most impressive thing in my memory on that day was the unrelenting rain. It was miserable. The troops marched past, and those that had Blanco, which was how they whitened their belts in those days, their belts were dripping down, and particularly those wearing red was staining those tunics. But nobody seemed to mind. And of course, in amongst this terrific parade were the ruling heads of state from the Commonwealth countries. And I think there were something like 70 of them. But the one that stuck in the memory was that of the Queen of Tonga, Queen Saloti. She got enormous publicity, but we saw her, and she was there in an open-top coach, not wearing any extra clothing, and certainly not any waterproof clothing, just sitting there. She was quite a large lady, beaming with happiness. And I do remember that. The parade seemed to go on forever, and it passed down through and round Hyde Park Corner, through the arch with the quadriga on top, and then processed up Park Lane, along Oxford Street, down Regent Street, and back down the Mall to the Palace. What I really remember about the day is the sheer excitement and good-naturedness of everybody. There was a huge sense of optimism and pleasure and admiration for this beautiful young girl who'd shouldered such enormous responsibility. We hadn't at this time any idea of what had gone on in the Abbey, but it must have been the most impressive event and an enormous strain on our new young queen. However, when she went past us in the coach in Piccadilly, we were just entranced by all this. It was about as much as we could see for the whole day, because there were so many people. We did return across Green Park to try and take up a position outside Buckingham Palace, but the crowds were so huge we just couldn't make any headway. So we had to make do, at least with having a ringside seat in Piccadilly. And that's something that's stayed with me forever. I spent my early years in Portsmouth, my father being in the Navy, and it was a wonderful place to be. I had a small dinghy which I had the use of and used to spend an awful lot of time sailing around Portsmouth Harbour looking at the ships that were based there. On one occasion I remember 2 Russian cruisers, the Ordzhonikidze was one of them, that brought Bulganin and Khrushchev to Portsmouth shortly after the coronation. 1953 was a very interesting year for young people like me. First of all the coronation, and then a month later the coronation review of the fleet. This had been a custom going back for many accessions of new monarchs for the king or queen to review the fleet at anchor and usually at Spithead, which is the stretch of water between the western end of the Isle of Wight and Southampton Water. On this occasion, in July 1953, 243 ships were anchored in lines taking up the whole of that length of water. It was really an astonishing sight. The head of the fleet, although she was in reserve, was HMS Vanguard, the last battleship built for the Royal Navy, completed just after the end of the war, so she never fired her 16-inch guns in anger. She was used to take the King, that is King George VI, and Queen Elizabeth to South Africa, and that's about as far as she ever went. But the Navy in those days was quite different from the Navy now, which has shrunk to something like 19 first-rate ships. It's an astonishing comparison of what the Navy was and what the Navy is now. Although, of course, the destructive power of the munitions that are available to the Navy are much greater than they were in those days. But that day, which unfortunately, because I'd been let out of school for the coronation the month before, and my father was serving in HMS Dido, a cruiser, which was in the review line, and of course they couldn't take guests on board, so I was left at school, much to my annoyance, even rage, so I had to watch it on television. But it was the most astonishing sight to see all these ships anchored in the Solent. There were some 22 ships that came from the Commonwealth countries, including the beautiful Amerigo Vespucci, which in fact was an Italian ship, an Italian training ship, and a square rigger. So that day passed and there was gun salutes and all the crews removing their headdress and cheering the Queen as she went past in the temporary royal yacht, which was for that day HMS Surprise, culminating in the evening as it got dark with the entire fleet being illuminated. I was going to say lit up, but that caused a huge joke at the previous coronation in 1937 when the commentator, who'd been having a pretty good party, announced at the crucial moment when the lights went on, he said, "Oh, the fleet's lit up!" And this caused enormous amusement. That day I regret deeply missing being there in person, but it was just the most impressive sight, and I don't think we'll see the like again.
My name is Judy Thompson. I was born in Millstone Cottage up the Dale. And then we moved down to Station Road because there was no bathroom in the cottage. And this house I'm in now, Tantivy, my granddad built, I think it was in the 1920s. And the barn at the end, that was the old smithy.
Right, now is that barn at the end that you say was the old smithy, has that got anything to do with Smithy Meadows?
Of course, yeah. You see, when my granddad had this, he used to keep pigs on the back. Where houses are on Smithy Meadows, They weren't there, that was a field. That belonged to John Dalton, the farmer. There's a well outside this barn where I think maybe the blacksmith used to cool his irons off, you know. Well, I'll tell you how we found out. My daughter bought this house. And she found out that the barn had the preservation order on it because I think it was Derbyshire Dale's planning department told us it was the old smithy. I went to Hathersley School at 3. If your mum had more than 2 children and your father was still away, you could go to school early. And I can remember my dad coming back. I was up the Dale, and of course we never saw many men because they were all away fighting. And I can remember him coming home, and I went and hid from him. Yeah, I went down some steps to a well at the bottom of these allotments, and I hid down there. I thought he'll never find me. Just a few people went to Lady Manners. The majority of us went to New Mills.
Did you have to go there on the train then?
Yeah.
Every day?
7:30 in the morning. And some girls, I mean, Heather Renshaw, she lived up in Bronte Cottage under Stanage. I think they used to walk down sometimes from there to catch the 7:30 train. Yeah, they had a heck of a walk.
What fantastic memories of village history, Judy. We'll come back to them shortly, but I want to ask you now what you can remember about Coronation Day itself.
Of the coronation, well, actually I know more about the coronation of 1953. Now we've got television that can show you the film in colour. It just didn't seem interesting in black and white, although we didn't know any different, did we? I mean, your attention span at the age of 9 is only 20 minutes, because nobody had a television then. Don't forget, I don't think they ever closed the road because hardly anybody had a car.
Did people rely on radio then?
Yeah, wireless we called it. Oh, I think it just rained all day. Those years, you see, were austere, weren't they, after the war? And it was about the first big event. So it was a relief to go to the Memorial Hall to watch the coronation on TV. It was in black and white at that time, so I got bored and escaped with my friend to tour the village. I remember the sheep roast. I think that was on the car park of the Ordnance Arms pub. I had a fatty slab of meat in the sandwich and went to watch the maypole dancing. The children doing the dancing were from Hathersley School, and we all received a replica coronation spoon in a fancy box.
Before we started recording, you were telling me about a song that was specially written for the coronation that you were taught whilst you were at Hathersley St Michael's School. Can you tell us a bit more about that, please, Judy?
I don't know when we sang it. I can't remember that. I was only 9 at the time. I know the tune, but I can't sing anymore. It went, Elizabeth of England, as fair as flowers in spring, to you we sing with heart and soul of Britain's pride in you. You led the youth of Britain to work and win success by firm determination when you were our princess. The next line I can't remember. Wherever you have been has won for you devotion as England's fairest queen. I think it may have been Jeff Darwin who taught it. He was the 11 plus class teacher.
You've been away from the village, haven't you, for 60 years?
Yes.
And now you've come back.
Yeah.
So your memories of Hathersley will be as it was all those years ago.
That's correct, yeah.
So I bet you've noticed some changes, haven't you?
Oh, massive changes, yes. At one time I used to lay in bed at night and I could recall every name of every house in the village.
What shops can you remember?
Right, they were self-sufficient. You didn't really have to go into Sheffield for anything unless you wanted furniture or clothes. There was the Co-op and Co-op Butchers next door, the fruit shop there now. Next to it is that Indian place. That was the Co-op, that building, and the one next to it. There was the garage and repair place, where it is now. Right at the bottom of the village was Mosley's shop, which was a little sweet shop, and I worked there on a Saturday. I think I got £0.50. I was no good at adding up. And Michael Robbins' dad, I used to dread him coming because his was like 1 and 11 and 2 and 11, 2 and 6. Oh, there was no till. So I had to add it up quickly. And everybody who went to school with me and knows how hopeless I was at maths. Mr. Robbins used to sit on this seat in the shop and tell me. Oh, used to give me his change back if it was wrong. You know the butcher at the bottom of the village? Can't remember what that was. But anyway, after the George, there was May Darwent's drapery shop. And she was a cod. She knew all the gossip. Everybody went in there for the gossip. She was one of my relations as well. Anyway, she had, you know those drying racks that we used to have over a fire to dry washing? She had one of those in the shop and she used to hang bras and things up. Auntie Gertie, now she had a draper's shop on Crossland Road. May with the other draper's shop was her daughter. Auntie Gertie was about 80-something, but she's still working. She had the front room as a shop.
Where was the shop on Crossland Road?
1, 2, 3, about 4 bay windows down.
From the top? Or?
Yeah,
Oh,
from
right.
the top. And then going further up the village, of course there was the Ordnance Arms pub. Big Bank was still there. The post office, Mr. Ibbotson ran the post office. And Watson family worked at the post office. Yeah, because Mr. Watson was the postman who was going around on the deliveries. Miss Watson used to do the cashier thing. And coming further up, there was Asa Littlewood's butcher's shop. My mum used to go in and say, I don't want anything over 10 shilling.
Now, the history books tell us that Hathersage was once really quite industrial. I wonder if you remember if any of the factories were still operating.
I remember the mill at the bottom of where the Catholic school is. But the Dale, that was running as a button factory because we used to go in the brook and look for pearl buttons. My father told me that Grandad built this house out of the factory chimney. So that must have been out of use then. Now his workshop was down Barnfield. That was the factory, but that was the needle factory, I think. Scratched on the window, my father showed me once. You know, in Charlotte Bronte, when she wrote Jane Eyre, she mentioned Mr. Stevenson's factory. Well, Stevenson was scratched in the glass on the window down there. I can remember the window because it was right next to he had one of those circular saws. We used to ask him to put it on because they got all these straps that went through the factory, you know, all rattling and crashing. We used to love that when we were kids. I remember a notice on the back of the door of the workshop down in Barnfield. Joiners, painters, decorators, builders, undertakers, he did everything.
OK, just a few words then. How do you think the Queen has done throughout her 70-year reign?
No, I think the Queen's done a magnificent job to all the ups and downs that she's had. Yeah, she has.
Well, Judy, I've really enjoyed our chat today. I don't know whether you realise it or not, but much of what you've shared is priceless village history that, but for you, would have been lost forever. You are an amazing lady. It's no wonder you have so many friends.
I've made friends wherever I've been, really. Yeah, sadly most of them are up there in the churchyard now, but quite a few left.
Well, when my sides have stopped aching and the tears of laughter stopped rolling down my cheeks, I shall remember today as one of the most enjoyable interviews so far. Thank you so much.
I'm Heather Rogers, and I've lived in the village most of my life, but not all of it. I was very young at the time of the coronation, and I'd only just started school, so I don't remember much, except being presented with a gold-coloured spoon. Each child in school, or maybe in the village, was presented with one. It was a replica of the anointing spoon, which was used at the coronation. I no longer have mine. My dad sold it when I was a teenager. I remember seeing a colour film of the coronation parade and the golden coach. It was on a screen in the Memorial Hall. I don't remember much about this, except it was colour when almost everything else was black and white. I don't remember if it was the same day, the day after, or a week after. Or maybe it was just a snippet on a Pathing newsreel before the actual film itself. Films were regular features in the Memorial Hall at that time. The main thing I remember vividly is the dress I wore on Coronation Day. I lived in a family group with my grandfather, my mother who was a single parent, she'd been divorced when I was a baby, and my aunt and uncle. Grandad had died just 2 months before the coronation, so everything was in a bit of a turmoil. Money was very tight. Mum usually made all my clothes, but because of sorting out after the funeral, she hadn't had time to buy material from Robert Brothers in Sheffield, so they spent every last penny they had on a dress for me for the occasion. It was a 2-tall dress, purchased from Jack Pierce's shop on Station Road. It had a square, shawl-type collar and was made out of a white material with tiny red and blue embroidered dots. I felt like the Queen.
My name's Mick White. When I was 7 years old, I went to Woodhouse School in Sheffield. We all stood in assembly and they shouted us names out, and the teachers gave us a gift. My gift was a small box, a small tin actually, of chocolate. And the older lads all received a penknife with the Queen on the penknife. I just remember walking home with these chocolates thinking, you know, I've got the world, because we didn't have much chocolate in them days. And that's about it.
Well, my name's Elaine White, and I can't remember a street party, but I do remember at my grandmother's cafe, Hope House Cafe, Station Road, loads of red, white and blue flags, even out of the bedroom windows, downstairs windows. She bought yards and yards of red and white blue tape, and I put it all around the iron beds, every bedroom, that all the way around. And then I do remember she took lodgers in, a lot of Irish, they were always the favourite lodgers, the Irish. She didn't like drink really, but they wanted a drink, the lodgers, and made an excuse. It was the Queen's celebration and everything, so she got the sherry out. She was busy serving, dashing backwards and forwards in the cafe, and every time she went in the kitchen, they were sat there and she'd give them a sort of scowl, what's going on? Oh, be Jesus, we're just drinking to the Queen, missus. It's all right, missus, we're just drinking to the Queen. And she'd carry on, and then she'd come in again. And I do remember the lodgers getting drunker and drunker and drunker until she took the bottle off them. I could tell you so much about, you know, at the cafe. All the hikers called her Ma Thomas. That was because she looked after them. And sometimes if she had any posh ones on, would you have a clean tablecloth on? Clean tablecloth. She was Welsh, real Welsh accent. Follow 'em home, that's what I always say. I bet you've got a bloody tablecloth at home, she'd say. And Mrs. Thomas, the socks round the gas fire with her. They're my boys, they've been climbing, their feet are wet, they've got to dry them off. If you don't like it, Sammy, bugger off. What you need is a dose in the army, you do.
She was in two books, you know, in mountaineering book.
They mentioned the rock climbers about going to Mars
Two different
Cafe.
books, local climbers, well known people, I don't know. And she's mentioned in there Ma Thomas's Cafe and Ma Thomas.
Oh yeah, that, yeah.
Yeah, she was a character, people were frightened of her.
Well, when I was at school, at the top school, we were told to make a scrapbook on the Royal Nigerian Tour. Of course, it was only cheap brown paper, bit of tape fastened around, and the newspapers were only black and white, so there were all these pictures in this scrapbook.
Oh, you've got them there, that's lovely. Tell us a bit about them, Elaine. What have you got?
Well, the first one's the tribesmen playing primitive red reed pipes, and they're dancing a jungle dance. Then you've got Prince Philip and the Queen waving.
They look young, don't they?
They do look young, yes. Very handsome, wasn't he, Prince Philip? And then somebody was running over to the car. It says at the top it could have been a bomb, but he'd a letter clutched in his hand. So I remember that. This guy just flew over. They managed to stop him, but actually all it was a letter. The man said he was wrongly dismissed from a job and he asked the Queen to help him. The only coloured one is a centre thing that was out of the magazine, and it's brilliant, with a crown on, the Queen of the Commonwealth. And it says it's specially photographed in the ballroom of Buckingham Palace by Cecil Beaton. And it was a 19-day tour.
So you're obviously a big fan of the royal family.
Yes, I was, yes. Well, I guess I still am now. She's done a damn good job, hasn't she?
So so much for showing us that.
You're very welcome, Wayne.
I'm Mike Rogerson. I was born in Hathersage. Harry Schofield, who was the headmaster at the time, announced that the king had died. I remember him seeing a picture of him waving goodbye to Elizabeth and Philip, and he looked pretty ropey then, didn't he? I remember 1953 for a variety of reasons. One of the most exciting things for me was the fact that they announced that the British team had climbed Mount Everest a few days earlier, and the news had got through on Coronation Day. The day itself dawned very, very wet and remained so for the rest of the day. There was a very attractive barbecue run all day in the village in what was the Ordnance Arms car park, which is now where the deli is, in the centre of the village. There was all sorts of things. There was a whole carcass of beef, I think, sheep. I remember, I think it was Andrew Chadwick from Abney brought a load of chickens down for the feast, one of which hadn't quite been executed properly. And when he twisted its neck a bit more, it ran round the yard with its head off. It was hilarious. From then we could have as much or as little, whatever we wanted to eat all day long. The barbecue itself was being manned by one of the butchers from the village, Asa Littlewood, and other helpers. We then would make our way up to what is now, well, is the Methodist Chapel area, and there was a wooden hut to the right of where the schoolroom is now, in which there was a large screen, probably, I don't know how wide it was, but maybe 8 feet wide and more, and we could watch that all day if we wanted to. It was a bit fuzzy, so occasionally we'd go into the other schoolroom where there were 2 or 3 televisions mounted and they could see a little more clearly. There were funny jokes being made by people like Noel Coward, I think, when they showed Queen Salotti of Tonga in an open carriage, despite the rain, with a tiny little diplomat with her. And somebody asked him who was that, and he said, "Oh, that's her lunch." The whole thing went on for hours, obviously. Very exciting for kids, I suppose, really, because it was the most dramatic thing that we'd ever seen. There were lots of military in the parade, and lots of royals and dignitaries from all around the world. In the evening, after we'd all gone home, having stuffed ourselves with endless great big sandwiches of pork and beef and lamb and whatever, there was a concert in the Memorial Hall. We all would be invited to take part. Lots of kids, quite a lot of adults too, formed a choir ad hoc and sang lots of patriotic songs like Land of Hope and Glory, which we all thought was great. And at the same time, food never lost its place in this day. And in the Lawrence Hall, there were some ladies serving jellies, trifles, cakes, buns, which we visited many times. We were all presented with a gift to represent the coronation, and I think it was anointing spoons, which weren't very exciting, but okay, they were a memory of some sort. And I remember feeling rather sick in the middle of the night, but that was my fault for eating too many trifles and jellies.
Mababu Malele, ancestors forever. Mababu Malele, ancestors forever.
I'm Elizabeth Madden. I was Elizabeth Knight. I grew up in Kenya, where my father was a padre, a chaplain to the English-speaking population in a very large area, covering the size almost of England and Wales, and covered the equator. In that space there were about 5 or 6 churches. He travelled between them, and if there wasn't a church in an area, then we used to have our services in people's homes or in the clubs. It was an amazing place to grow up in. In 1952, we heard that Princess Elizabeth and her husband, Prince Philip, were coming to Kenya at the beginning of a world trip. And my father had a letter from the governor of Kenya saying that Princess Elizabeth and her husband would like to worship in a church as private individuals on Sunday the 3rd of February. And so the preparations were made. They decided that the nearest church that was convenient to Sagana Lodge, which is where they were staying, was this very small church that had been built on land given by somebody in the area. A very simple church with just chairs, I believe, no organist, no choir, nothing like that. And so we prepared for the visit. You may remember that Sagana Lodge was given to them as a wedding present by the people of Kenya. They visited it, I think, at the very beginning of February, perhaps February the 1st or 2nd, and they were staying there. And that was on the Sunday, February the 3rd, that they said they'd like to come to a service. People came from far and wide, bringing flowers to make the church look beautiful. It was a lovely part of the country to live in, beautiful flowers and very verdant. My mother wrote later to my grandmother saying that they brought 3-foot delphiniums and carnations and roses to decorate the church. So the Queen and Prince Philip came very informally. I've got a photograph. There were no official photographs allowed, but there was a photograph taken of them arriving at the church, and just with them and my father. So the service continued, and apparently at the end of it I was so excited and said to my mother, "I'm so pleased that you married Daddy." So she thought that was quite a nice thing. I don't think she'd probably married anybody else, but anyway, I was very pleased that she'd married my father. And so that was that day. And then I think the next day, Princess Elizabeth and Prince Philip went, which is quite well documented, went to Treetops, which was a tree house set in a forest quite near to a place called Neri. And you perhaps will have heard how she went up to Treetops as a princess. And during that night, which must have been the night of February the 5th, King George VI died. And so she, unbeknown to her, she came down the steps as a queen. That tree house has now been renovated and has thousands of visitors every year. I'd love to go, but I haven't. History tells us that Prince Philip was told of King George VI's death, and in Sagana Lodge he told the Queen of her father's death. And you can only imagine the shock and the sadness that she felt. And so on February the 6th, there had been a wedding in the little place where we lived, a little village called Nanyuki. And my father had taken the service, and he and the congregation had left the little township where we lived and gone, I think, either to the reception. My father was not very good ever at staying very long at reception, so I imagine they probably went to the reception and left, and he went to see somebody and then heard a message from one of the few people still in the town, the butcher, whose name was Jack Wright, somehow contacted people and said that the Queen would be leaving from Nanyuki Airport in a few hours' time on her way back to England. My parents came and fetched my brother and I, and we stood at a little crossroads in Nanyuki, which was decked out completely with bunting, ready for the visit that should have taken place the next day on February the 7th, when Prince Philip and Princess Elizabeth were due to go to the airfield for a sort of military review. And so, of course, the bunting had all been put up ready for this event. We stood underneath the bunting, and as I remember it, there were perhaps 8 or 10 of us standing there, my parents, my brother and I, and perhaps 1 or 2 other people. I know it was not very many, but more than just us, I think. And so this cavalcade, which wasn't really a cavalcade, it was a car, perhaps 2 cars. Security wasn't quite such a high issue in those days. And as the car passed, we sort of felt that the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh somehow recognised my father, and it was almost as if the Duke of Edinburgh nudged the Queen and said, "Oh look, there's the person who took the service on Sunday." So they went down one road and we went back to our house on the other road, and just a very few minutes later we saw a plane take off. Not many planes took off from the airfield. It was the army airfield, and so not very well used, but this plane took off, and I remember standing in floods of tears because the King had died, and perhaps even more poignantly because it was actually my 10th birthday. And 10th birthdays are very important when you're 10. And so we waved, realising that, I don't think perhaps I realised, but my parents perhaps realised that they'd seen a little bit of history.
All these wonderful letters and photographs, many of which will be at this exhibition. Will you be attending the exhibition?
Yes, I look forward to seeing other people's contributions and hearing the stories of other people as well, because we've all had such different experiences, and it'd be good to share those with other people, and I'd be very happy to share my experiences with those who are interested.
Well, I feel privileged. Thank you so much for such a wonderful story, backed up by the most unbelievable photographs that I never dreamed I would get sight of.
Yeah.
I'm extremely grateful to you. Thank you very much indeed.
When I set out at the start of this project, I seriously wondered if I'd be able to find many people at all who were willing to come forward and record their memories of the coronation. But I needn't have worried. The response has been truly incredible. All sorts of local people have very kindly related their stories to me, and every single story has been different. Some people were actually in London and saw the royal procession with their own eyes. Michael Shuttleworth gave us a detailed account of the Royal Review of the Fleet. To find people that were in Africa at the time of King George VI's death was way more than I ever dared hope for. But Elizabeth's account of her father actually officiating at a private service of worship for Princess Elizabeth and Prince Philip is a wonderful bonus for us all, something I hadn't even imagined. And there's still more to come. I'm going to play you a Zoom conversation with somebody, believe it or not, who had access to the royal family on the momentous occasion of this coronation. My thanks to Martin Robinson, who's managed to obtain special permission for us to broadcast this conversation, which is coming up right now. Ladies and gentlemen, here is none other than His Grace the Duke of Devonshire.
So we're here to talk about the coronation. I've got just a few short questions. It'd be great to hear what you have to say about your involvement. But firstly, what are your memories of the coronation? You were 9 years old, I think.
Yes, I was just 9. And that was 3 years younger than I was a page to my grandmother, my father's mother, and she was mistress of the robes, which is a sort of senior helper to Her Majesty, well, Princess Elizabeth, and then the Queen. And then she became Queen on the coronation day. And because my grandmother assured, I suppose, the Duke of Norfolk, who arranged the whole coronation, assured him that I would behave myself and not be embarrassing for anybody, I was allowed to be the page to her, to my grandmother, although I was 3 years younger than the limit. So I was really the youngest person with an active part to play. Prince Charles and I think Princess Anne were there, but as spectators. But I can't think of anybody else that young who was there. There were lots of other pages, but they were 12 years old or older.
So well, quite a privilege, I would imagine.
Yes. It was an enormous privilege, and I was aware of that, I think. One of the wonderful things about it was I was at boarding school and I didn't like it at all. And because there were a lot of rehearsals, every time there was a rehearsal, I had to come to London for the whole day. So it meant a day away from the school, which I didn't like a bit. So that was an added bonus.
It sounds like it. I'm sure plenty of school children would have enjoyed a day away from school.
Absolutely.
So, well, how did you travel there? Did you?
Well, that's the thing I really remember most. My parents had a house in Mayfair, in a place called Chesterfield Street, near Curzon Street. And my father had arranged for the state carriage, I'm not sure the correct term, but anyway, the Cavendish Devonshire family coach to come down from Chatsworth, I imagine on a low loader or something, and with horses from the local brewery up in Derbyshire, and coachmen in uniform, which must have been made for them, and they were going to take us from Chesterfield Street, from this little house in Mayfair, to Westminster Abbey. And so at some unearthly hour, like 6 o'clock in the morning, there we were, dressed up in my father and mother in their robes, and me in my page's kit, which included wearing suspenders and stockings, which for a 9-year-old boy was quite embarrassing. I was terrified some of my school friends would find out that I was wearing. Anyway, we were there, and there's a photograph of us in the doorway, and the carriage arrived, the coach arrived, and we set off. And of course, there were huge crowds in London, and some of them have been sleeping out along the route for 2 or 3 days to get a good place. And they were just beginning to wake up. And so we got some sort of rather jeery cheers, sort of slightly sarcastic, I think, quite reasonably, this rather old-fashioned appearance of this coach with these two men behind in uniform, in sort of 18th century uniform. Anyway, we set off, and I remember going down St. James's Street, which is, you don't realize how steep it is until you go down it with a horse and carriage, or 2 horses and carriage. And we were overtaken by, I think it was the Marquis of Bath. And his carriage the horses were cantering. He was going really fast, and that was quite a scary moment. After that, the next thing that I remember was that we got completely lost, because the coachman and his assistant, I don't think had ever been to London. There was no reason why they should have been. They certainly hadn't driven around the streets of London with all the sort of everything cordoned off. And so there was no way of speaking to them except by hanging out of the window and shouting round the front. And so my father, in all his robes and everything, he didn't have his coronet on, thank goodness, but had to, and of course that amused the crowd no end, because I think we were behind what was then called the Army and Navy Stores, which is quite close to where we were going, but it wasn't the right place. Anyway, we eventually arrived. The coach was built for 2 people to sit, but because I was little, I was squished in between my parents. And the way we arrived, the door opened on my father's side, so he got out, and to my horror, there was this terrible tearing noise. My little sword, it got caught in the lining of his robes and ripped all the lining out.
Oh, God.
And it just shows. So he none of us were. I was horrified. My father wasn't very pleased. But just to show how well organized everything was, almost before his foot had landed on the pavement below the coach, there was a person there with a needle and thread to sew it back together again. They thought about all that. They thought about everything. Anyway, so that was that. And then I was whisked off with my grandmother, and my parents went wherever they went to. And of course, by then we'd rehearsed 6 or 7 times, and although it was different because there was many more people, it wasn't too scary. And so when the procession formed up, quite a long time later, we had to be there an hour and a half or something before it actually started. The Queen obviously was at the front, and then she had her train held by 6 maids of honor, 3 on each side. And then behind the Queen's train was my grandmother, and then just me holding her train. And in lots of the movies and the photographs, you see the Queen and the maids of honor and my grandmother, and then usually I'm cut off out of it. But anyway, I was there, so that was fun. And then we went to our places in the and I do remember going up the aisle in Westminster Abbey, how close everybody seemed. All these huge people, or it seemed to me, my memory, mostly men, but there must have been a lot of women as well, very close to where we were walking. And I suppose it was quite a narrow space, but that was a shock to me. And so then the service proceeded, and the most difficult thing I had to do was at one stage my grandmother walked out with me holding her train behind her to help the Queen some part of the ceremony. I don't exactly know what. Take something away from the, I don't know. So we went forward, and that's quite easy. You have to keep the sort of pressure of the train more or less the same, not too tight, not too loose. But then my grandmother had to walk backwards to get back to her place. And obviously she couldn't turn around because that would be not right. So I had to get my hands under the train and hold it so that she didn't trip over it. And that was quite nerve-wracking. But anyway, we managed that all right. And then I do remember the noise of when the Queen was actually crowned and the crown was put on her head. And then everybody said, "God save the Queen," incredibly loudly, everybody in the Abbey. And I think the doors were open. In my memory, I could hear the outside, but I don't know whether that's really true. And that was really I don't know how we got back home. I know I went off quite late on, very hungry, sort of 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And I suppose eventually I must have found my parents somewhere. But it was, of course, I've seen lots of the films and things, and but we didn't see any of the procession. And I think your father was there, wasn't he?
Well, as we were discussing just before we started this, my father was doing his national service in Egypt, actually, with the RAF, and he was called back to come and attend the coronation to help keep the crowds at bay and to line the route with part of his with his colleagues from the RAF. It seemed quite something to bring them back from Egypt to do that, but that's what they did. So fantastic experience for him, but not quite as involved as yours.
And not quite as comfortable, because I think it rained a bit, didn't it?
It did, I understand. Yeah. That his recollection was that it rained a fair bit.
Yeah.
And you know, he had to stand there
of course, yes,
in looking the part.
Yeah, and there was all the service people lining the routes, and then a huge parades of all the forces from all over the Commonwealth.
Commonwealth, yes, absolutely. I think that's right.
And of course, the army was much much bigger then than it is now. So that must have been an extraordinary experience, because there was lots of other people arriving by carriages, wasn't there?
My understanding, I did a little bit of research. My understanding was, I think there was something in the order of 150 carriages. Does that sound right?
Yeah, well, I've no idea. I mean, I'm not surprised, but that must. So it was plenty going on for your father to watch.
Must have been. I mean, as you said, the Duke of Norfolk has the distinguished responsibility of organising these things. So sounds like he did a particularly good job.
Well, he did think of everything, and I know that at one stage somebody said, "What happens if it rains? We'll need umbrellas to get people from outside the Abbey." And he said, because he was also in charge of Ascot Racecourse at the same time.
Right.
He said, "Well, there's hundreds of umbrellas in the left luggage part of Ascot Racecourse." So they got all the left behind umbrellas from Ascot, and they brought them down for people to use to get from wherever they were going. He thought of everything. But the needle and thread was brilliant, I thought.
Well, thank you for sharing that experience, Stoker. It's amazing to hear. It really is, and you know, I doubt there are many more people who can give us good a version of what went on as that. So,
well, I wish of course, like always, I wish I'd written it down, but I didn't.
Yeah, well, at 9 years old, I don't think you could be expected to do that. I think clearly big celebrations coming up as in a month or in a little period of time. What are the plans to celebrate the Jubilee? What are your plans to celebrate the Jubilee, and what are Chatsworth?
Well, they're the same. We'll be at home. We'll be here at Chatsworth, and I think that the celebrations will be very local, like they have been for past Jubilees. We'll have a bonfire on what we call the Crobs, which is the hill between Chatsworth House and Enser Village.
Yeah.
And it's a sort of traditional place for celebratory bonfires. And so we'll have that for the local community, and there'll be some food and drink probably beforehand, because it won't get dark till quite late, will it?
Yeah.
In June. about as late as it gets. And then we'll light the bonfire, and that'll be that. It'll be lovely. It'll be fairly low-key, but traditional. And somebody told me they were hoping to organise a street party in Enza village, and no doubt there will be in the other villages. But I think it'll all be local, and we'll be part of that.
Do you know, I think we're probably up there, Stoker. That's just been the greatest story. I mean, we've swapped some. Well, you told me some stories in the last couple of interviews, which have been brilliant, and that really ranks up there. Yeah, absolutely superb.
Yeah.
So
it was a great privilege, and you know, I'm very lucky to do it. I even got a medal, which I still wear. So I don't know whether the Prince of Wales has got one too. I'm expecting he has, but he got rather more than I have. I've only really got that one.
So there's just one more of our recorded reminiscences for the Platinum Jubilee of our Queen's reign. To say I'm grateful to all those who've come forward to share their private, often happy, but sometimes emotional, even painful memories of those early days is a huge understatement. Thank you everybody for welcoming me into your homes, on occasion for feeding and watering me, and of course for your wonderful memories. Together, what we have achieved is a lasting record not only of the historical matters you have related, but also a record of your own voices, something that future generations will be able to enjoy long after we are no longer around. It's incredible that 70 years on, so many are able and willing to give first-hand accounts of what they saw and heard all those years ago. And a special thank you to all those who've managed to track down genuine memorabilia from the original coronation festivities, which has really brought our 21st century celebrations to life. To be able to watch the coronation service in full on the big screen here in the Memorial Hall, coupled with the memorabilia and the recorded reminiscences, gives all those born after 1953 a unique opportunity to share in the momentous events here and abroad that led up to the coronation itself and Her Majesty's 70-year reign. Our very last recorded memory is coming up right now. I've been asked not to reveal the name of the contributor, but what he has to say reminds us that even in the midst of 1953 coronation fever, day-to-day life still continued. Not everybody's memories were exclusively centred on the royal goings-on, but these non-coronation-based memories were, and indeed are, every bit as important and revered by the people to whom they belong.
I'm just thinking Coronation Day was a day of great importance because we were just coming out of a war. Lots of things were going to change. Many people were very hopeful that it was going to be changed for the better. This particular day in the Hathersage Methodist Church Hall, we were going to be treated to watching the television of that coronation. People were so excited. There was a buzz around the place. Absolutely incredible. And it was packed. And I was there, quite a young man. I reckon around about 19, 20, something like that. But at the same time, there was a young lady there who caught my eye. I'd met her the month before at Cliff College when she'd come down with a youth group from up in the northeast, and her sister, who I knew, had asked me to chaperone her, which I did. She was there watching that television with me, and do you know, that was the start of 31 years of marriage to that lady. So my memories of that day are a memory of heightened emotions, which I was part of. I was caught up in that as well. But for me, to remember it, as remember my first wife, and all those happy times we had together before I was remarried and had another 25 years of happiness. So that's how I remember that particular day. Excitement, joy, a great day, ever in my memory. Thank you.